Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. We're coming to you on back-to-back days from downtown Atlanta. You'll hear from Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan, my colleagues who are here on the scene with me in just a little while as we put this matchup into focus. The Peach Bowl showdown between number 10 Penn State, number 11 Ole Miss takes place at noon here in Atlanta on Saturday. We're excited to be in the stadium, home of the Atlanta Falcons. This time it'll be home of the Peach Bowl. We got to look at that facility. A couple days in practice action. We have practice reports over at Lions247.com, along with a ton of coverage from our time thus far following Penn State's bowl experience. But we begin with some intel on Ole Miss, the opponent in this matchup. We heard about them a little bit earlier in the month when this matchup was announced, and we focused on it here on the podcast. We're going to do that right now as kickoff nears with Jared Redding, who covers Ole Miss for our 24/7 Sports Network. I got to meet Jared in person here down in Atlanta, and now we have him here on the podcast. And thank you, sir. I know you're fresh off the practice field, your final look at Ole Miss practice of 2023, and we're getting close to kickoff. So let's start with this. If there is a pressing question that you have about this Ole Miss team at this time of the year, what is it?
Yeah, I think it's one of those is if you look at this matchup and you look at Ole Miss's history the last 2 years with bowl games and, just big games in general underneath Lane Kiffin. He's won a couple of them this year. But you have to question, with history on the line, with Ole Miss having a chance to win 11 games for the first time in program history, the trajectory the program is on right now, I think the thing you want to know is, can Ole Miss handle the moment in this one right here, in this matchup? Ole Miss has won 10 games for the second time in 3 years, had a chance to win 11, like I just said. But can they match Penn State's physicality on the line of scrimmage? I think that's going to be the factor on both ends. Ole Miss's offensive line has been banged up the last 3 games of the regular season and over the past month, and so you wonder if some of them are going to be ready to go and what combinations are going to work against Penn State defense, which is widely regarded as one of the best in college football.
You've had a chance to speak with Ole Miss players throughout the week now at this point. I know Daniel Gallen on our site caught up with a bunch of Ole Miss defensive players for their thoughts on Drew Aller and Nick Singleton and other players on the offense. What are you hearing about Penn State out of the mouths of Ole Miss players and coaches this week that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think it's just the general consensus that, regardless of conference affiliation, that Penn State's probably one of the best well-rounded teams, kind of across the board. And, quite frankly, probably one of, if not the best team they might face all year when it comes to just having everything accounted for, it kind of seems like. Because I know Penn State, obviously, from what I've researched, what I've heard from, their defense speaks for itself. One of the top scoring defenses, top in rush defense, top in pass defense, or within there. But they often overshadow an offense that isn't too shabby either. Maybe they're not as explosive maybe as Ole Miss's offense, but they get the job done on the scoreboard and they take care of the football. Like what Ole Miss does. And so I think they realize that they're going to have their hands full, but, just hearing from them during the week and seeing them during the week, it seems like, they're not as tense, as they've kind of been in the past couple of years, especially late in the year, and they're playing a little bit loose and playing free and realizing, that, you go out there and you have fun, you play hard, you do your job, then good things could happen.
Lane Kiffin was pretty excited about the fact that he didn't anticipate any opt-outs back in the initial Peach Bowl press conference. Things have changed a little bit. Ole Miss is down a defensive player. Can you tell us about what they're missing from the field this Saturday?
Yeah, and Lane, start off with addressing that situation with Cedric Johnson, the Ole Miss's edge rusher, opting out to prepare for his pro football future, going to play in the Senior Bowl before going to the draft. That it was kind of a shocker with Cedric Johnson, because especially when you look at what Cedric Johnson has accomplished during his time at Ole Miss, and also kind of the weight that he bears as the recipient of this year's Chucky Mullins Courage Award, which is given to a defensive player who embodies, the courage and the will Chucky Mullins had. And you can look into that yourself. There's an ESPN 30 for 30 documentary on it. But the tagline is never quit, and he's opting out of this one. But at the end of the day, this is a business decision at the end of the day, and you have to look after yourself at the end of the day. So he respects Cedric Johnson's decision. Maybe he sees it a little bit differently, but Ole Miss is going to be missing an edge rusher that, even when the stats don't always show it at times, he's been a factor on just about every play that he is on the field. Just very speedy for somebody his size, and is he's not known as a stopper in the run game, but he's done it quite a bit this year, and but at the same time, Ole Miss has been able to overcome, stuff, players go to the sidelines for whatever reason because Ole Miss has had some depth on the defensive line. I think that's been a big reason why Ole Miss defense has taken a big step in first year Pete Golding.
Speaking of steps forward, we saw Jackson Dart do that this year at quarterback for Ole Miss, completing 65% of his passes for nearly 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. Former USC quarterback, made the move to the SEC last year. How has he settled in, and what kind of a stage and test is this being viewed as for the Ole Miss QB?
Yeah, I think when you look at Jackson Dart's progression from year 1 to year 2, I think it's plain and simple, just being a second year in this system. With Charlie Weiss coming, the co-offensive coordinator, coming in at the same time, he's done a lot better job of not only playing free, but also taking care of the football while playing free. Not trying to force things so much and just having a little bit more of that it factor that you want, as your leader quarterback. Because, if you remember correctly, there was a quarterback competition on paper from the outside just because they brought in Spencer Sanders from the transfer portal and they brought in Walker Howard, who a couple of years ago was one of the top prospects in the 2022 recruiting class. But, he's taken off and he has run with it. As far as the challenge that Penn State presents, I think, as I alluded to earlier, and as you probably alluded to all throughout the season, that, there's very few weaknesses with this Penn State defense, at least, on the surface. But his receivers have kind of brought it up subtly that, that this is one that, if they can get behind them, if they can hit the home run when they need to and just play smart, then I think Ole Miss has a chance because, and Ole Miss is going to have to be balanced in this game too. It's not going to have to be just Jackson Dart, which is a big reason why Ole Miss kind of struggled to find his footing a little bit early on in the year, but they're going to need him to, get out of bad situations, have Quinshawn Judkins, kind of take the load off of him and have his offensive line step up with some injuries the past couple of weeks of the season.
Quinshawn Judkins, 1,000-yard rusher this year, 15 touchdowns on the ground. But I want to keep the focus here on the pass attack because we heard from interim defensive coordinator Anthony Poindexter, Penn State's perspective. And this morning he really referenced that Ole Miss has that firepower at the receiver spot. 3 guys are over 700 receiving yards on the season. Penn State doesn't have a single player that reached 700 receiving yards this season. Can you tell us about that trio? And I know Trey Harris is the guy that seems to be the explosive factor, averaging 18 yards per catch, and a guy who's got 850 yards, 8 touchdowns on the season. Him in particular, what kind of a matchup does he present?
He's a matchup nightmare, I would just say, just plain and simple. You look at those 3 receivers, and the numbers are fairly balanced across the board. Trey Harris taking the most of it, and he wasn't even healthy for half the season too, and he's still able to. And so you could have possibly seen a 1,200-yard receiver going into this Peach Bowl, but he suffered a knee injury, his second game of the year against Tulane, and still managed to play through it and do his best. But it was after the bye week where he was already a factor, but you started seeing a lot more of the home run balls. And, you saw him kind of be the guy that defensive coordinators look at and say, do not let this guy beat us. But he gets a lot of attention, rightfully so, with his size, speed, and just big play capabilities, good ball instincts as well. And you look at Jordan Watkins, reliable receiver in the slot. He's, the guy who he'll hit a big play. He'll get the big play every once in a while, but you always rely on him to make catches. He's got massive hands. He tends to find himself open more often than not. And then Dayton Wade, he was a walk-on when he transferred from Western Kentucky going into last year, has really made a name for himself just with the speed. He's also made some freakishly good catches this year. And he was a guy that, a couple weeks after the regular season ended, he basically announced, not exactly formally, that he was going to be done after this year and he was going to go to the NFL, and he hasn't brought up anything about it since. But that's the general consensus that's out there, that he's going to leave after this year. But like you said, these guys have been balanced. They have a balanced passing attack. And part of that is the balance that Ole Miss has been able to show late in the year, and it's kind of proven more often than not to be kind of pick your poison. But that's if the offensive line can do its job. and give Jackson Dart time to find it based on the improvements that you saw from Jackson Dart this year, and saw Ole Miss is having a little bit more options, which is they lacked last year.
I mentioned Judkins being a 1,000-yard rusher, but you look through and there's 5 games out of 12 where he finishes at less than 4 yards average per carry. 2 of the last 3 games of the regular season, he's under 4 yards per carry. And I know that much of that probably ties into the offensive line. This is an area where when reviewing Ole Miss the last few weeks, it seems to be a little bit of a question mark because of some injury issues, performance issues. And then I look at the other side of the trenches, Penn State's #1 nationally in run defense. So when you see that matchup, is that maybe the biggest concern for Ole Miss establishing themselves up front offensively?
Oh, 1,000%. And I think that's the reason why you saw Ole Miss's offense really struggle the last 3 weeks of the season. Going into Ole Miss's pretty much the biggest matchup of the season and maybe of the Lane Kiffin era, up to the point where they played Georgia on the road, back-to-back national champions, 20-plus game win streak. They lost their right tackle, Micah Pettis, with a broken foot just a couple days before they were going to play that game. And then during the first drive of that game, they also lost the left tackle who filled in for the previous left tackle who moved over to the right tackle and lost him with an ankle sprain, which, looking at him in practice, he still has that ankle taped up. It's still kind of question marking up in the air is if he's going to play. I would bet on him trying to go with it and see what happens based on what we've heard up to this point. But Micah Pettis is a huge loss, especially in the run game. He is – that's what his forte, I guess, is, so to speak, is just moving guys out of the way, big body, being able to pull and being able to, hit the second level and get the guys downfield. I think they've tried different combinations between that stretch a little bit. But like you just said, Penn State's got the #1 rush defense in the country, if I'm not mistaken. I think underneath 70 yards a game, if I'm thinking at the top of my head. So I think, this game for Ole Miss is going to be won or lost in the offensive line. And, when you have Quincy McGee, Victor Kearney, transfers who come in to do their job, and, Jeremy James, who was previously the right guard all year long, moved back to what was previously his spot at right tackle, and what they're going to do with Caleb Warren, who's played center this whole year, seeing if maybe he could play guard. A lot of question marks up there. And so I think, yes, they're healthier than they had been over the last 2 months since, everything kind of seemed to go downhill with injuries. But at the same time, this is without question going to be the biggest test of the season, I would argue.
Penn State surrendering 69.7 rushing yards per game. That's actually 11 yards better than any other team across the country. Let's finish here, Jared, on the subject of Ole Miss versus Penn State. Give us a player to watch that you haven't mentioned yet here on the podcast, and give us your prediction on the final score and why you're going in that direction.
That's a tough question to answer because I think there's one I feel like on the offensive and defensive side of the ball.
Go for it.
I think on the offensive side of the ball, we've talked about the receivers. We talked about Quinshon Judkins. We talked about Jackson Dart. Talked about the offensive line. But a guy who's been a lot more factor, not just in the run game, but in the passing game in the past or the last couple games of the season, was the tight end Caden Prescorn. He transferred in over the offseason from Memphis. He was also a guy who was banged up and hurt, missed the first 3 games of the regular season, and hasn't really been a factor in the passing game up until the last couple of games, against Georgia, against Louisiana Monroe, and against Mississippi State. You may look at the stat sheet and you may see maybe 2 touchdown catches all year long, but he has been used a little bit more as a weapon. He's always been phenomenal as a run blocker, and you saw that when the run game started to find its footing midway through the year, being able to do what they did against LSU, against Auburn, and kind of in the middle of the pack, Arkansas as well. But I feel like that this is going to be a game where, because of the challenges that Penn State presents, he's going to be used as a blocker, obviously, but have a little bit more options to go with. And I think that's a guy to kind of keep your eye on a little bit. It may not be as flashy on the paper, but the reason why Ole Miss's offense has been able to step up when it's needed to more often than not to go to 10-2 since his injury has been Caden Prescorn. And on the defensive side of the ball, I think you can point to many guys up front. I think Ole Miss's defensive line is most definitely the strongest suit on the defensive side of the ball. I would look out I got 2 guys. The edge rusher, Jared Ivey, who transferred in from Georgia Tech for the 2022 season. taking a big step from year one to year two. Just his size and quickness off the ball, kind of a bully on the line of scrimmage, kind of been the opposite, or not that on the same, but on the opposite side of Cedric Johnson. And I think the defensive tackle, J.J. Pegues, is up in the middle. He's an Oxford, Mississippi native, started his career at Auburn, transferred to Ole Miss to come back home. And, he's a guy that, he's done some good things. And even though the stats don't show it, he's been a factor. And Ole Miss was one of the top leaders in the country in sacks up until that Georgia game. And they've been a little bit quiet on the stat sheet the past couple of games. But if they're going to win this one, like I said, it's going to be one up front.
And what do you got for a prediction for us? I know I threw you two questions at once there. So
score
prediction and your reasoning for that prediction.
This is something that I thought about before we recorded. At Inside the Rebels did our Fearless Forecast, which is basically our score predictions. And I said 24-20, but I picked Ole Miss, and here's why. How you doing? I think if you look at this game on the surface and you look how well-rounded Penn State is, even regardless of conference of affiliation, the amount of NFL talent that's on their roster, I think you could argue in a lot of aspects that Penn State might be the better team. And I would tend to agree with them in a lot of ways. But this is just a gut feeling thing. And it's not just because I write for an Ole Miss site. It just kind of feels like the perfect storm for Ole Miss. But we also said that 2 years ago when they lost the Sugar Bowl to Baylor with a chance to win 11 games as well. So I can see this final score either way, but I'm going to go with Ole Miss on this one just because I feel like this team is different. They're a lot more resilient than any Lane Kiffin team here. They've been a fourth quarter, second half team all year long. And if they can stay in the game with Penn State and keep it close to the second half, I feel like Ole Miss is going to be able to finish it at the end of the day. But like I said, I could say 24-20 Ole Miss or 24-20 Penn State. Flipping the coin. Based on what I just said, I'm going to pick Ole Miss in this one, but this is why we play the games.
Jared, really appreciate it. We'll see you in the press box. Thank you for now for the perspective on Ole Miss ahead of this matchup.
Thank you.
You may have heard it there. I think Jared was dealing with a little construction noise around him. I know there's some stuff being done around this hotel, but we appreciate his insight. And now we're going to get to our guys from Lions 24/7 and Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan, who have been on the scene with me here in Atlanta. We covered a lot of ground on Wednesday, fellas, with our initial podcast from Atlanta, and we've got plenty to follow up here on Thursday. We're going to get to our predictions and our bold predictions and our players to watch a little bit later here in the segment. But let's begin with the updates. I mean, they keep coming fast and furious, and it hasn't stopped just because this team is preparing for a bowl game. Daniel, you had a story up on Thursday after we had a chance to speak with him Thursday morning, but Adisa Isaac on Wednesday evening announcing that he will indeed be off to the NFL draft. He is, of course, here. He's competing in the Peach Bowl. To what extent? That's an interesting note. Maybe you can get into that a little bit, Daniel. But Adisa Isaac, for those who have not followed his journey, a lot of variables in play that made you wonder if he would leave last year. He did not. He stuck around. He capitalized in a big way. Ended up being a first-team All-Big Ten player, could be a day two guy. And now what do we make of this decision and ultimately Adisa Isaac's path to it?
I don't really think it surprised everyone. I think Adisa Isaac, when you look at these NFL draft decisions, he was in the when, not if category. Even though you asked him Thursday morning, Tyler, if that's how we looked at it, is it the way he looked at it? And he did say that he had some of those, I think, lingering thoughts is how he worded it with whether or not he would come back for a sixth year. But I think that Adisa Isaac is someone who really, really helped himself over the course of the year. I think that coming back for the fifth season was really, really big for him. I think you posed that question to him earlier today too, where that goes down as probably the biggest decision of his life so far. To come back for this fifth year, to put together the type of season that he had, and to put himself into a better draft slot. I mean, he probably made himself a substantial sum of money. We'll find out in April what exactly that looks like. But I think for Adisa Isaac, there are myriad factors that go into it. One of his brothers has cerebral palsy. Another brother is autistic. His sister is autistic. He was raised by a single mother. He carried the load in that family from a very, very young age. Adisa is someone who has always come across as very mature. And he's also come across as very honest with us. You go back to the blue-white game in April 2022. And I think that going into our post-game availability with him, we tend to tread lightly around guys coming off of injuries because we kind of know how James Franklin tends to handle it, how the program tends to handle it. But Adisa Isaac came right out and said that he tore his Achilles. He didn't shy away from that. He didn't shy away from what it was like coming back from it over the course of last season, where ahead of the year, he said that he still felt like he was 85%. And over the course of the season, even when it looked like he had kind of come all the way back, and he was very honest that he said that he didn't feel like he was all the way back yet. And I think that kind of, working back, I think that process really gave him a big appreciation for the season. Back in November, he talked about playing a lot more free, and he felt like that was something that was really helping him on the field. So he's going to give it one last go in the Peach Bowl. He said that he expects to play the majority of the game. He also said that it kind of sounds like that he'll start, get a lot of time early, and then it'll kind of play it by ear from there. His time might taper off a little bit. But I think that Adisa Isaac is someone that this program is really going to be able to hold up from a variety of ways. Overcoming adversity, being mature, what extra time at Penn State can do for you, getting the most out of your experience. I think that it's someone where, we weren't surprised to see it happen, but it's still a cool thing to see Adisa Isaac get to declare and get to take this next step in his career.
There's no doubt he's matured as a football player. 7.5 sacks. That's 3 more than any teammate on this squad. 15 tackles for loss. That's almost double the next highest total on the Nittany Lions. And he showed up in the big-time games. 5 total tackles for loss against Michigan and Ohio State. And he certainly has matured as a man as well, working his way in year 5 to team captaincy. And just wanted to share this quote that we heard from him this morning on his decision to stick with Peach Bowl plans and remain a part of this preparation for his final college matchup. He said, quote, "I felt like it was only right. Personally, I felt like it was best for me to stay, finish it out strong. I couldn't really watch this game. I had to be a part of it. I just want to put the icing on the cake with this one." And when we're talking about icing on the cake, Mark Brennan, there are a lot of guys searching for that in their Penn State careers. You spent some time while I was on the other side of the room. You were speaking with Curtis Jacobs. And, we've been talking to Curtis since his high school days. He's always been a friendly face and a great conversation. Just curious what stood out as he's on the precipice of wrapping up his Penn State career and turning pro as well.
Yeah, I think he's another guy who really helped himself by coming back. I mean, he could have gone out last year. I'm not sure where he would have been drafted, but I think he's going to be a guy who, could be in that 3rd, 4th round type area now. And I also think he's a guy that's going to be able to go to the combine and do some really good things. But the interesting thing about Curtis, and we've all had a chance to talk to him, just, like Adisa, just a tremendous interview. And, willing to share, the things that were important to him. And I asked him specifically, coming back, where did you improve from last year to this year that makes it feel like this is the right time to go when last year it wasn't? And for him, it was less about on-field play than being a leadership, a really good communicator, all of those kind of things. So I think sometimes when we're covering a team, we get so wrapped up in the numbers or so wrapped up in stats that we don't maybe understand what's really important to some of those guys. And Curtis Jacobs, to be able to communicate that as effectively as he did, I'm going to miss him because I think he's been, one of the really, really good interviews. So, that part of it was big. And, all of these guys who decided to play, again, I'm following up on what Adisa said, and Theo Johnson, and all of them talked about that, committing to something that they want to see through. And I think that's important, and that's not a knock. And he said it. It's not a knock on people who decided not to stay and play. Everybody has their own reasons for doing what they're doing. This has become a business for them at this point. These are business decisions that they're making. But I think the level of maturity that we've seen from these guys. And, the other thing is, this is a guy who came in when he was a true freshman in 2020. So he comes in the COVID year, thinks he's going to have an opportunity to learn from Micah Parsons. And, Micah, it looked like he was going to be on that team. He was with the team right up till the preseason. And then when the Big Ten began monkeying around with the schedule, Micah decides to go. So Curtis was a guy who had to play early in his career, and he was on some bad teams. He was on some really bad teams. And that's another hallmark of this class, I think, is that they were on teams that were 500 type teams or below 500 teams and decided to stay with it, where everybody could have scattered. And this is one of the things that Curtis said. Everybody could have gone their own separate ways when things weren't going well, but they kept it together. Did they get to their ultimate goal, the college football playoff? No, they didn't get there. But look what they're ending up with. You're coming off of one New Year's Six win, and the last time the Rose Bowl would have been played in its conventional format of Big Ten, Pac-10, or Big Ten, Pac-12, whatever you want to call it at this point. I guess you don't call it anything now.
Pac-0.
Yeah, and now you're in an opportunity to become the first team to win all 6 major bowl games. So I think that's really something they could hang their hats on. And it was nice to be able to get a chance to talk to those types of players, even though I'm disappointed that this bowl doesn't do a media day where we have access to all the players, because I think that's very valuable. I do think the fact that we got a chance to talk to these certain players was pretty cool.
You brought up a great point, because Theo Johnson, Curtis Jacobs, guys who came to campus in the midst of, before the COVID year, and then eventually COVID takes over 2020. They were coming to a team that won 11 games the year before, and Journey Brown was back, and Micah Parsons was back. And I don't need to rehash it, but we all know where the team was coming out of 2019 into 2020. 2 years into their careers, they were 11-11 in Nittany Lions uniforms. Since then, they're 21-4, looking to make it back-to-back 11-win campaigns. The only losses along the way, of course, Ohio State and Michigan. But, yeah, it has been quite a turnaround. Those guys have been a part of it. And another one of those stalwarts of this roster, another one of those big personalities on this roster is Devon Ellies. He is somebody who has not announced his plans yet for 2024. He's a fifth-year guy, but like Caden Wallace, who we discussed before, and like Adisa Isaac, he has the availability of that COVID year if he were to use it to remain on campus for a 6th season. We haven't seen a lot of guys do it, but Jonathan Sutherland, PJ Mustipher took COVID eligibility, and of course Sean Clifford did it. We're still waiting to see if anyone does it this time around. Daniel, you spent a lot of time with Devon here on Thursday morning. What kind of vibes were you picking up from him, and regarding what's next for him, and really where he's gotten to in his career? A guy who flat out earned the starting job as this season went on. I don't know if folks realized it, but he took over that spot from Hakeem Beamon about midway through and ran with it the rest of the way alongside Zane Durant.
Devon Ellies told us earlier today that he's going to announce his decision after the Peach Bowl. I don't know if it'll be a Jesse Luketa situation where directly after the game he says that he's not sure, but by the time we get to the press box, the graphic is out. But it'll be interesting to see what he chooses. I think that he's one of those guys where, coming back for a 6th year, how much more can you really boost your stock? How much more can you really do? I think that what he's shown over the second half of the year, I think has been really impressive. But it was really good to spend some time with Devon today. I mean, I think the way that we split up over the course of the season, I think that he's someone that I don't necessarily get to spend a lot of time with. I think that usually it's you or Mark, Tyler, talking to him. And he's also someone that you usually go to ask about other people because he's so well connected in that locker room. I think that he's shown that he's a great leader. When he was at the podium during his early session today, I asked him about Adisa Isaac coming back, having this type of season, putting himself in this type of position. And now I do think that it looked a little emotional for him up there. They're both class of 2019 guys. We're both top 247 recruits coming in that class. But getting to sit down with him, he's just kind of a very good personality. He said that he's having his own hot sauce brand, or his own hot sauce come out soon. There's been some kind of funny questions going around in terms of Sheetz or Wawa. And after someone asked him that, he turned, I think there were 7 of us sitting there, and he turned to each of us and asked us what our our answers are.
And what was your answer, Mr. Gallen?
Mine was whichever's closest.
No.
I do think I'm near one of the only sheets is below the Mason-Dixon line in my hometown, which is a twist. But I just think that he's someone who has really kind of locked in over this last part of the season, and he talked about that too, where he kind of feels like stuff has come together for him, down this stretch, and that he's playing some of his better football. I think that you can't really discount his leadership either. He's not technically a team captain as voted, but the way that James Franklin and everyone talked about the leadership roles this year with who they were losing, it was going to be a lot more dispersed. And it sounds like that Devon Ellies was someone who stepped up in a couple different points. He was one of the ones, I think after the Rutgers game that we heard spoke. It seems like every now and then he's been able to be an emotional leader. I think we've seen him break down the huddle a couple times. He's someone who I think has really made a big impact. And down the stretch of the season, I think he was finally able to expand that impact a little bit more beyond the intangibles into tangible production on the field. And we'll see when he makes his announcement if that's enough to kind of propel him to the next level, or if he wants to use that to propel in the next year to try to make a run at the NFL in 2025.
Devon and Curtis Jacobs, both out of that McDonough school program in Maryland, which of course previously produced PJ Mustipher, came to town as a two-time team captain. And you got Dennis Sutton out of that same program who's on the rise. You got Mason Robinson, who's a freshman here, taking a red shirt. So that has been a good pipeline for them. And it looks like, maybe a couple guys reaching the end of their journey here. We will wait for official word from Devon following this matchup on Saturday. A couple other guys who are definitely on their way to the exit door and the defensive backfield, Keaton Ellis, Daequan Hardy, had a chance to catch up with both of them here on Thursday morning in Atlanta. Starting with Keaton Ellis, is really interesting career path. And I know we've kind of hashed it out a few times here, Mark. You and I spent several games over at State College, and so did James Franklin, and so did other members of this staff, the hometown kid. He talked about today just how much different he values Penn State because of growing up within the community, growing up the son of a former Penn State football player, and just generally being able to live out a genuine childhood dream here in Happy Valley. Now, he came in as a cornerback. He made a bunch of noise early. He's banged up for portions of his career. He shifts over to safety. He ends up being a starter last year. He ends up being a backup this year while also being a team captain. So there's a lot of layers to this one. He feels like there was value in this fifth year. I think some people externally may wonder, did Keaton Ellis taking that COVID eligibility make the right call? Because we've seen KJ Winston and Jalen Reed take over that safety room as younger components. And Keaton Ellis did not blink when he was asked that question today. Says that he feels like his body of work is out there and it's on display. He feels like when he's been given opportunities on defense here in 2023, he's maximized them, and he's ready to sell himself. He's still trying to figure out if he's going to be training in State College or training down in Florida, but he's ready to go out there and sell himself as a marketable option for NFL teams who can, add him in the defensive backfield, view him as a component on special teams. So we'll be keeping tabs on that, Mark. And I'm just curious from your vantage point, if you've seen something like this at Penn State, where a guy comes into a year, is named a team captain, he's a returning starter, and by the end of the season, he's getting, maybe a dozen, maybe 15 defensive snaps per game. Just really a unique set of circumstances for the local guy.
Yeah, not unless somebody was banged up, and he really wasn't. But I'll go back. We talked about this during the season, how impressive he was. And I just think that's why somebody like that is named a team captain. I'm sure they didn't go into this season thinking, you know what, KJ Winston and Jalen Reed are going to play so well that it's going to limit the snaps for one of the veterans. That wasn't their thought process. And even we, like early in the season, when we had our depth chart, we had him as an or designation because we figured, and I think the snap counts would have reflected it early in the season.
Tyler. They did.
Yeah. And just as the season went along, I mean, what are you supposed to do if you're the coaching staff? You have two guys who are playing at really close to an elite level. I mean, when you see some of the stuff that KJ Winston was doing out there, and we had a chance to talk to Anthony Poindexter today, and we've heard this over and over and over about Jalen Reed, about his IQ out there on the field and kind of being able to be the quarterback of that secondary. And, that's no knock on Keaton Ellis, who was an honors student and graduated very quickly at Penn State. And I'm sure, he might have his second degree already. I don't know how far along he's on. But when you have somebody like that who isn't going to be a pain in the rear end when things don't necessarily go his way. Now, we could argue, would he have been better off coming out last year? I don't know. I mean, I think we kind of know who Keaton Ellis is. And I don't know that he's ever going to be a starting level player in the NFL. And that's not a knock on Keaton. That's like, if you're predicting somebody could be a starting level player, that's like an early round draft pick. But what could he do at the next level? He can be your core special teams guy. He could be somebody who could play anywhere in the secondary because he was all over the place. He can play close to the ball. He can play back in space. And he goes through this year, and he was the ultimate team guy. Now, I know that nobody's drafting somebody based on being the ultimate team guy. Otherwise there would be a bunch of end of the bench guys in college basketball that everybody's cheering for at the end of the game. But that's not who Keaton Ellis is. He was a legitimate player. And I don't think his odds are going to be any different now than they would have been last year. Will they be better? No. But everything is going to rely on if he gets the opportunity. And I think this is one guy from this class that James Franklin owes it to him to bang the table to get him into the NFL Combine, to do whatever he can do. I don't know how that works, but if you're James Franklin, I think you pull whatever card you can, because this guy sacrificed for the team and could have been a divisional force. He could have been somebody who was an issue. And instead, he was the exact opposite. He was one of the strong points. So I obviously think very highly of Keaton. I know his family. I've known him since he was young. He went to school with the intern. He was a year ahead. So I look at that as on a personal level too. But just looking at it strictly, from him as a player, he's going to have an opportunity. Will it work out for him? We don't know. But that's all you could ask for at this point of your career.
Yeah, and out of the many people who may have been surprised that those two took over the safety room, Keaton Ellis may not have been one of them. He told us last year in Pasadena that KJ Winston was a future All-American. So he knew the room he was returning to, and he embraced it, and it ended up how it ended up. But he had nothing but positive things to say about the Penn State experience and Anthony Poindexter as his positional coach for these last few years. The other defensive back I wanted to get to here, who is competing in his final Penn State game on Saturday, is Daequan Hardy. We referenced this earlier in the week that he announced he's going to the 2024 NFL Draft, another one of those 2019 prospects who could have returned for a sixth college season if he chose to do so. As expected, discussing it with him Thursday morning here, that punt return stuff, yeah, that was really good for his draft stock. I do wonder if that doesn't happen, is he a little more tempted to come back here? He said that he was in James Franklin's ear for 4 years about being a punt returner, and James Franklin had done a little hindsight 2020 conversation with us midway through the year when Daequan Hardy returned a couple punts for touchdowns in his first game at that position. But beyond that, just a little bit more about the scope of Hardy that I picked up from this conversation Thursday. He was silently committed to Buffalo in the winter of his senior season after being the star of the state championship win for Penn Hills. Still was sniffing around for Power 5 opportunities. He made an official visit to Penn State in January of 2019, and he left without an offer. And Terry Smith said, hey, we're going to stay in contact. But at that point, there was like a week left before signing day. He had the silent commit to Buffalo as kind of a safety net of sorts, and he wasn't feeling all that rosy about Penn State showing up with an offer. Within 48 hours of signing day, he gets the Penn State offer. He becomes that last addition to the 2019 recruiting class. And we heard from James Franklin on signing day, that press conference 5 years ago or whatever it was, that they were overthinking it with Daequan Hardy. They were looking at the measurements and they weren't focusing enough on the football player who they had witnessed in person. The staff did his performance in the state championship game. And so he's at the finish line here. He's kind of an understated guy, Daniel, but we've all had conversations with him. He's not going to beat the drum for himself. He's not going to yell about much, but he really turned into a dynamic weapon for Penn State over the years. Not only was he fantastic in slot coverage for most of the last few seasons and really stabilizing that nickel position, but he stepped up on the perimeter at times this year at the cornerback spot, and of course earned all Big Ten status as a special teams returner. What a fantastic story based on what I just laid out, to go from a Buffalo silent commit to an all Big Ten defender and an all Big Ten special teams player?
I think the one thing that really stands out about Hardy this year is he missed those first couple games of the season, and he didn't say why. He wouldn't talk about that when he came back, but when he did come back, he was like a man on a mission. The way that he looked, I mean, in his first game back at Illinois, he gets an interception while playing on the perimeter, which is something that we hadn't seen him do yet in college. And he was a bunch of the guys he was on the podium with today. They were all asked what their favorite memory of the season was. And he said it was that game because it was the fact that he got to be back with them after missing those first two games. And he was able to make an impact. That was something that he really felt strongly about. So I think that beyond the type of player Daequan Hardy is, I think that sort of shows the type of teammate he is. And I think it shows the buy-in that James Franklin had throughout the season from some of these players and how some of these veterans approach the year. But I do think that the punt return piece of it is really big for him. I think every once in a while you see someone at that NFL level who gets to exclusively be a special teamer in that role. And I think that this opens just another door for Daequan Hardy to get out there, because I think that when you think about him finding a role on special teams, I think most of us, our minds went to, he's going to have to go somewhere, be a gunner, and go down, be on punt team, be on kick team, really do that thankless work. But this just opens another door. It's another avenue for him to try to make a team, to show what he can do with the ball in his hands. And if a team has a pick and they're trying to figure out what they can get out of a cornerback beyond just playing the nickel, this is something else that they can do. So I think that Daequan Hardy too is someone who benefits from some of the trends in football in terms of nickel essentially being a base defense for a lot of teams now. I think that opens up opportunities for him. But I do think that where he is right now versus where things were a week before signing day when he was coming out, it's a world of difference. And I think that, kind of like we talked about with some of these guys earlier, he's someone that Penn State can hold up again as a proof of development, the showing of results of what happens when you stick with it and what you're able to accomplish.
Back on signing day last week, Alan Zamitis, who works on Penn State staff now, former All-American cornerback for the Nittany Lions, knows the position very well, played extensively in the NFL for several seasons. He talked about that slot corner role, and he said if you find success there, you essentially have a PhD at the cornerback position. So he's got a lot cooking for himself, does Daequan Hardy. He'll be 5'9" forever. That's not going to change. He's added about 15 pounds now at Penn State. He's 180 pounds versus 165 pounds or 160 pounds when he got to campus. But it's been cool to see him overcome some of those shortcomings that are just natural with his abilities on the field. And we really saw more of that here in 2023. Getting over to the coaching staff and a kind of a final update from a busy morning here in Atlanta. Anthony Poindexter was available for us today. He's the interim defensive coordinator. He's going to be just wearing that label through Saturday. And after that game concludes, Tom Allen, recently hired former Indiana head coach, is going to be the defensive coordinator for this program. And Anthony Poindexter will resume his duties as safeties coach. But really a lot to like about what we heard from Anthony Poindexter today. I have a story up at Lions247.com, and a big tip of the cap to Mark Brennan, who was pretty much stationed over with Poindexter for much of that conversation and got us the audio for it. Mark, this is a guy that we wondered. Tom Allen hired. He openly told us, did Anthony Poindexter in a press conference setting a couple weeks ago, that he had, quote, several conversations with James Franklin regarding the open defensive coordinator job. He's got defensive coordinator history back at UConn. It's a different level, but James Franklin found his head coach of the defense in Tom Allen, and it still sounds like, based on what we heard from Anthony Poindexter, that he still has a hell of a safeties coach that's on board with this Penn State team.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of on both sides of the ball, because you look at Jawan Sider, and with all due respect to Ty Howell, he's a younger coach, and I think people would have been a little surprised if they would have gone in that direction. Ty Howell's ultimately going to be a coordinator and a head coach. I don't doubt that one bit. But I look at Jawan Sider a little bit differently, as a guy who could really pick where he wants to go if he wanted to, and he's choosing to be here. And I think Dex, it's the same thing. He was asked about it up on the podium. I wasn't in there. I know Daniel was, about the College Football Hall of Fame. Penn State went there yesterday, and he couldn't have been more uncomfortable talking about that because he doesn't like to talk about himself. And then he was asked about it at one of the breakout podiums, which I'm sitting at now. And again, he was completely uncomfortable talking about himself. He was asked multiple times about Tom Allen and had nothing but positive things to say about Tom Allen, talking about how when Dex worked at Purdue, he knew what Tom Allen was all about because we know how good that Purdue offense was and what Tom Allen was able to do against it. So all about that. And then I asked him, I tried to do it in a very respectful way because it's not an easy thing to ask. But everybody's wondering about it. It's so how do you handle that when you want the job but somebody else gets it? And he gave a great answer. I don't have it verbatim in front of me, but
I have it. Want me to read it real quick?
Can you say it?
I'll give it back to you, Mark. Here's what Anthony Poindexter said when Mark asked him about the fact that Tom Allen got the job and he was under consideration. He did not. He said, quote, "I got into coaching to help kids and I have a passion for football. Really, I want to see kids experience what I experienced. I had a lot of experiences through my playing career, and if they can just feel some of those moments and I can help them feel some of those moments, that's all I really want. I don't have to be in charge. I don't have to be the guy. I had those moments in my life. I just want to work with a really good organization with really good people and win games. And that's what Coach Franklin created here. He created that for me and my family." Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, and that's the perspective of somebody who's in the College Football Hall of Fame, right? That he doesn't need the spotlight on him. And so long as he's helping kids. Now, does that mean he won't leave for a job at some point if he has the opportunity? I don't know that. I mean, we don't know what's in somebody's heart or what opportunities may open themselves up. But we also know this, that I think Penn State's now in a position where it has the money that if you want to keep this caliber of coach, not as a coordinator, you're going to make it worth his while financially and responsibility wise and all these things. And I think we've seen the responsibility that James Franklin's been willing to give him as they've gone through these coordinator changes. But I don't know that he could have handled it any better. And I didn't expect anything less. I mean, I only expected him to handle that really well, but I did want to know how he felt because there were a lot of people out there who wanted him to get the job. I mean, there are a lot of fans out there who wanted him to get the job, and understandably so. And the fact it didn't work out that way, it's kind of the way, big time sports is. And that's what we're dealing with. We're talking about big time business, big time sports. And, this isn't all, sunshine and flowers now. It's you're shooting to be at a certain level and coaches are going to make the decisions they have to make. But for him to be that magnanimous about the whole thing, I just think is tremendous.
Yeah, and Poindexter, it was his first time to the College Football Hall of Fame on Wednesday evening. He was inducted in 2020. That ceremony took place in Las Vegas. So not only did he get his first opportunity to see his own biography and they have player highlights for all these inductees, he had the entire team with him. And so we heard from guys like Devon Ellies and Daequan Hardy and Adisa Isaac today just about getting a chance to review those highlights. It was Daequan Hardy's first time seeing Anthony Poindexter's playing career in Virginia, and I think that opened some eyes. Anthony said he doesn't talk about his career to the guys. He doesn't really need to do that, doesn't feel the need to do that. But I think there's a different appreciation for Anthony Poindexter here on Thursday after a lot of those guys experienced what they experienced at the College Football Hall of Fame. By the way, his parents, his in-laws, his wife, his kids, they're going there Thursday. And what a proud moment it must be for Anthony Poindexter as he's going to get to also be the defensive coordinator in the interim here on Saturday. He did say Tom Allen's in meeting rooms, and we'll read one more quote from Anthony Poindexter, and you're wondering what's that dynamic like. And he says to Tom Allen, "Wherever you can lend a hand, lend a hand. We don't have egos that way. Chime in whenever you think it's needed." So they're off and running. He says he's excited to get started with Tom Allen as they officially kind of settle into their new roles after this matchup. Tom Allen, of course, defensive coordinator and linebackers coach now. So something to keep tabs on moving forward. But I think if you're a Penn State supporter, if you're an Anthony Poindexter supporter, by the way, this is the guy who was in the mix for the Virginia head coaching job a couple years ago, you're really happy about the feedback that we're getting here from the man himself on Thursday in Atlanta. getting back to the game itself and some of the components involved here, who's out of the game for Penn State? You can cross Chop Robinson's name off the list because he declared his opt-out a couple weeks ago, declaring for the NFL draft as well as a junior. Johnny Dixon, this is unofficial, but we haven't seen him on the practice field with Penn State since November. And again, a newsbreaker at 24/7 Sports, Matt Zenitz, reported on December 15th that Johnny Dixon was expected to opt out. If he's going to put an announcement out there, he's running out of time. It was brought up to Anthony Poindexter today. Poindexter said, that's a James Franklin question. Maybe it'll get asked on Friday to James Franklin, or maybe we'll just show up to the stadium and Johnny Dixon won't be there, and we'll just all watch Penn State play football without Johnny Dixon. But regardless, let's look at those two spots, fellas. Chop Robinson's gone. We know how impressive he was off the edge and even going in the interior at times. And then at the other spot, you've got Johnny Dixon, where you like the cornerback depth, but this was a guy who was such a dynamic defender. 4.5 sacks, led all cornerbacks across the FBS level. We know what he's accomplished in coverage in recent seasons. So, Daniel, when you look at these two components that we expect to be missing for Penn State's defense, which is a little more glaring to you?
I think cornerback, trying to replace Johnny Dixon, I think that one stands out a little bit more. I mean, you ask any defensive end about their depth and the praise for Zariah Fisher and Amin Vanover. I think that we know what those guys can do. And then Jamal Lions is someone that I think that room and that whole defense is really, really excited for. So I think that at defensive end, none of those guys are Chop Robinson yet. But I think that the sum of those parts can really help. But I think when you look at cornerback, there's just a lot of youth there. You go down the depth chart, you have Kalen King, Daequan Hardy, Cam Miller, and then you have a pair of true freshmen in Zion Tracy and Elliott Washington. There's a lot of excitement for both of those. KJ Winston said that he's really, really excited to see those two guys get extended reps through bowl preparation and to get out there on the field. But I think that those are two guys that are going to be going against an Ole Miss passing attack that is pretty prolific. You got 3 guys with at least 700 receiving yards. Anthony Poindexter was kind of marveling at that a little bit earlier today, how impressive that is. One of those guys, Trey Harris, is averaging more than 18 yards a catch, and he's a bigger body at 6'2" and more than 200 pounds. So there's going to be some challenges there. But I think in terms of those two opt-outs or potential opt-outs that we know of right now, I think that cornerback is going to be a little bit more intriguing. And beyond that, Johnny Dixon was such a key player in that Prowler package and moving him around. So that's kind of another domino that's going to fall and someone else that you're going to have to replace in another role. So it'll be interesting to see what that secondary looks like. I think at this point, Anthony Poindexter and Terry Smith have a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in being able to coach these guys up. But I think that's where I think potentially that's going to could be a fun, interesting, curious area to watch with Tracy and Washington potentially getting a lot of run.
And I would even keep an eye on King Mack in slot coverage potentially.
Yes.
I know they love what he can do there. He's a safety, but they love what he can do in that slot coverage. And maybe he gets a chance here with Dixon presumably unavailable. And Cam Miller, of course, for as much as we talked about the ability of Dixon to get to the backfield, Cam Miller racked up 3 sacks this year. So he's a guy who's come up with some timely blitzes as well, and we will be monitoring on the offensive end where things stand with Harrison Wallace during pregame. We covered a lot of ground on Harrison Wallace on our Wednesday podcast, but back with the team practicing after missing all of November with an injury. Will he play? Well, everyone tells us that's going to come down to James Franklin and Trey Wallace, which leads me to believe that he's medically cleared. He's out in practice, and it's just going to be more of a gauging the value of playing versus not playing. And James Franklin will have to kind of make a determination on that one. We'll have our binoculars handy in the press box on Saturday morning. Let's get into some keys to the game before we get to our final predictions on the score of the Peach Bowl. Mark, when you look at this from Penn State's angle, what we've learned about them through 12 weeks, what's gone on in the past month with a little bit of staff change and certainly the personnel components that we just discussed, what is the lingering question for you as we head over to the stadium on Saturday?
The lingering question is going to be how effective will their offensive line be if 2 of the veterans don't play a whole lot of football? I'm just so anxious to see how this works because,
Yeah.
I can't imagine this being a close game. I could imagine it being a close game, but if it is, do you really think that Olu is going to say, take me out, or Kalen King is going to say, I don't want to, I want to be on a pitch count, or Adisa Isaac's going to say, I just don't know. But I do know this, that if Olu is extremely limited, and if we're not sure what we're going to get out of Caden Wallace, that could really change the whole dynamic of that offensive line. And I think that could make life more difficult for Drew Aller. And then in turn, you can see where those dominoes are falling. So to me, if they're in a position where they're limiting those guys but not giving them the whole game off, that's one thing. If Olu doesn't play at all, I mean, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We've seen them manage that with Drew Shelton, with rotating guys in, and if that's the way they go about it, it's going to be kind of business as usual, even if Shelton plays more than expected. But I'm really anxious to see how that works. And so I think, to me, as I look at this game, the question, the thing that will make it the most difficult for Penn State is if those tackles don't play an awful lot. And we don't know what's going into those decisions. They won't share it with us, nor should they. I mean, that's a competitive advantage. And if we don't know what's going on, Ole Miss doesn't know what's going on. So that puts them in the same predicament we're in, kind of looking at this like, this could be two completely different offenses based on two players. I mean, we can talk about Drew Aller, and we could talk about the running backs and Harrison Wallace. We could talk about the tight ends. But to me, the two most important guys for this game are the tackles.
Yeah, and we did get just a little bit of the curtain peeled back from Adisa Isaac with kind of his logic on what his Saturday might look like. He said, yeah, first half I'm expecting to play a lot. He said after that maybe I slow down a little bit. So it's strange. I mean, we're all predicting. We'll get to our predictions. We're all predicting one possession games. And so a lot of these guys have talked about, I can't stay home and watch this game. I got to be there. I got to see it through. Are they going to want to come to the sidelines in the second quarter or third quarter in a tie game against Ole Miss and number 10 versus number 11 because, maybe an injury happens in the second half and you survived the first half with that one? There's a lot in play there. And
you can say that, Tyler, you can say that at the Westin here on the 9th or 10th floor 2 days before the game when you're kicking back talking to the media. When the adrenaline is flowing and the stadium's packed and fans from both teams are going nuts and it's your last game ever, I mean, maybe they have – first of all, I would not blame them for doing whatever they do. I just don't think any of them are wired that way. So I'm hoping it is a close game so we get to see these guys as much as we possibly can because I think all of them are really good players.
And of course, Kalen King, Theo Johnson, Daequan Hardy, other guys who know what they're doing in 2024. It does not involve Penn State football. Kind of all fall into this category of, is there a pitch count in play that Penn State staff is having to work with? And because he always references Saquon Barkley, does James Franklin in this kind of conversation. And remember, Saquon was talked about being a first pick, and he played in the Fiesta Bowl. Well, he wasn't exactly on a pitch count. He had 25 touches, 175 total yards, and 2 touchdowns in that game against Washington before moving forward as the number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft.
And who was behind him?
Miles Sanders. And
right.
Speaking of players that are behind some of these guys we mentioned, I know you just sent me a message while we were chatting on their podcast. You have a note on Jamal Lions, and that makes a lot of sense because everyone seems to have something to say this week about the Philadelphia freshman edge rusher.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We've been so overwhelmed by information now. As we were talking, it occurred to me something that Curtis Jacobs said, and I have it here. And again, I'm going to paraphrase it just because it'll be easier. But Curtis says that he's a future first-round draft pick, Jamal Lions, and that on a scrimmage this week, the other day, he had a PBU, a TFL, and a strip sack within a handful of plays. Now, I had a PBR last night, maybe a couple.
Only one? Yeah.
I don't know that. I mean, to have a PBU, a TFL, and a strip sack for a true freshman, it's what we're hearing about his level of athleticism. It's just a matter of it all coming together. So I did want to get that in there before the pod ended, just because it kind of adds to the stack of reports that we've been getting about Jamal Lions. And I would not be surprised, as good as they are at the end. he's the kind of guy who could come in. We've seen defensive ends come in and kind of flash. Now, I don't think it's going to be Smith Vilbert this year, but you never know what a guy, a true freshman, has had a month off to kind of hone his skills and go back and look at film. Maybe he could be a breakout player here. Maybe that's the guy I'm going to go with as my player to watch. Maybe not.
Nice tease. And the buzz has been building for Jamal Lions since his first week of practice action in August. And now it's just maintaining. So he's one of those players that'll be a breakout candidate in 2024. We'll see if he gets a head start on that against Ole Miss. And Daniel, are there any dynamics of this game that really stand out to you that we haven't necessarily addressed today or over the course of December, as you've learned more about Ole Miss, as you've got a chance to speak to some of their players, that you feel like could really determine the outcome here?
Yeah, I think like I touched on earlier, the Ole Miss passing game against that Penn State secondary, I think that even if you don't have Johnny Dixon and even if you have a limited Kalen King, I think that that's going to be fun to watch given the depth and the talent that Penn State has stockpiled back there, and given that we haven't seen some of those players kind of with the lights on, more or less. But I do think it'll be interesting to see what Ole Miss does from the tempo perspective. That was something that was brought up today to Anthony Poindexter, and he said that over the course of the year that they've seen teams that have gone tempo at various points, but they don't see teams that go tempo as much as Ole Miss does from wire to wire. So that'll be good and a good challenge. And I think one more is Quinshon Judkins, the Ole Miss running back. He was the reason last year why Nick Singleton didn't make some freshman All-America teams. He was someone who had a big freshman year for Ole Miss last year. His numbers are down a little bit this year, similar to Nick Singleton, but I think that he's a very talented back. And as Anthony Poindexter got asked, like, who does he remind you of over the course of his career? And whoever asked the question said, you played with Tiki Barber, you've seen all these players through your career. Who does he remind you of? And Anthony Poindexter said, well, we go against two pretty good backs every day in practice, in Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. I think that the comparison was made a little bit more to Katron than Singleton with Judkins, but I think that how that Penn State front stacks up, I think that they're operating pretty full at the defensive tackle spot and with the linebackers, but I do think that run game will be interesting to watch too.
All right, let's get into our players to watch as we start to enter the final stretch of this final pregame podcast from Atlanta. And we'll begin right back with you, Daniel. Who are you going with? Penn State players to watch. I think we've mentioned about 80 of them, so you have 5 others to choose from. Yeah,
I wrote down 2, and one was Cam Miller, but we already touched on him a little bit with what we could see from him and his versatility. So I'm going to go with Javen Williams, the freshman offensive tackle. Like we talked about, we don't really know what we're going to see from Olu Fashanu and Caden Wallace. Drew Shelton has worked as that number 3 tackle this season, and I expect we're going to see a lot of him. It doesn't matter which side he's going to be out there, but I do think that if it's something where both Wallace and Fashanu are pretty limited, Javen Williams is that next guy up. And he's mostly worked on the left side this season. We saw him do a little bit at right tackle earlier this month. So I'm curious to see what he can look like. Going up against an SEC front, he's the 5-star recruit out of Wyoming, someone who is a really, really good athlete, has some fun film out there. And we've gotten a couple glimpses at, and he's gotten good reviews from his teammates. So I think that Javen Williams is someone who we could see a lot of and would really be worth keeping an eye on.
And Daniel, remember, Olu Fashanu's opening start was in the Outback Bowl, finishing off that season, and then what we learned about him in the years ahead has really changed his entire potential in the sport. We'll learn with Javen Williams, 5-star player. Olu Fashanu is a 3-star prospect, and to this point, he has played in 3 matchups. So not in any peril of burning red shirt. That's out the window, anyways, in the postseason. Mark, who are you landing with on your pick?
Yeah, because of opt-outs and projected opt-outs, we've spent so much time focusing on D-end and cornerback, and we've obviously talked a lot about the safeties, but to me, I think the interior of that defensive line is going to be a place to watch. I think if Penn State's able to control that running game and Judkins, they're going to be a good spot. So I am going to go with one Zane Durant. I think he got better and better and better as the year went on and was playing at just a hugely dynamic level toward the end of the season. I think this is the sort of game and the sort of opponent that, he's going to be up for, coming back down south a little bit, ready to get after it, get after the running back, get after Jackson Dart. I think Zane Durant's going to have a big game.
I took a long look at a couple second-year defensive players in Abdul Carter and Dennis Sutton. Dennis Sutton stepping up as a starter for the third time this season with Chop Robinson unavailable. And then Abdul Carter, can he build off of a big November and be maybe a game wrecker here? But I going back to Nick Singleton, can he build on what we saw on Black Friday? Because that was such a revelation moment for him and for this offense and really for what his career trajectory looks like at Penn State. I think if he had gotten to the finish line and it was kind of a sputtering effort against Michigan State, then you can pretty clearly define this season as underwhelming. And I know James Franklin and Jaywan Sider will bang the table and say that he has improved in a lot of ways. But just from a production standpoint, as a runner, a pretty glaring difference between the two seasons. He was under 4 yards per carry through 7 of the first 11 regular season games. Then he gets 118 yards on 18 carries against Michigan State, adds 68 yards receiving. And lo and behold, things are really set up for him in a national spotlight to wash a lot of those bad tastes out of his mouth from the previous portions of this campaign. If he can go out there, look like the star that he was in the Rose Bowl last year, and do that against an SEC squad in Ole Miss and help Penn State get to a win, regardless of if Penn State wins. If he can go out there and produce some fireworks, I just think that really reconfigures how we view this backfield, this offensive operation, because I think we've been kind of putting Nick Singleton to the side and saying we'll see it. We'll wait till we see it at this point in the year. And we saw it in Detroit. If we see it again here in Atlanta, I think that's a fantastic sign for where this offense is heading, where Nick Singleton is heading. And I do have some questions about what the offensive line will look like Mark referenced with some of the way they're going to handle personnel in this and how that may impact Nick. But you can probably apply it to Drew Aller and Nick Singleton about this being a launch pad of sorts going into their junior year. I think Katron Allen established himself as a junior, was consistent from start to finish, a little more inconsistent with Drew and Nick. And so this is a chance for either of them to have a bit of maybe another coming out party for Nick Singleton on a big stage, on a national stage. And I think if it falls short of that, and it's more of a pedestrian performance, and it's something like a 3.8 yards per carry clip and 55 yards on the day, then it fizzles a little bit what he accomplished on Black Friday. So just looking for momentum builders from Nick Singleton in the backfield. Let's go over to our predictions now. Score prediction, bold prediction. Give them both, Mark Brennan.
Yeah, I think with so many question marks about this game, about who's going to play, how much they may play, it's tough to break this down into any one unit versus another unit. So I looked at it a little differently. I looked at a Penn State team that played two really, really good teams in Michigan, which is obviously number one right now, in Ohio State, and played, I don't want to say played well in those games, but was extremely competitive. Penn State deserved to lose both of those games, but it wasn't absolutely blown out in both of those games. So it was right there. And then you look at Ole Miss scoring a total of 27 points while giving up over 70, in its two big games against Alabama and Georgia. And I just think it's kind of reflective of one team having, at a slightly higher level overall talent-wise. And I think that's going to carry the day. Again, Ole Miss scored 27 points total against those two defenses, and Penn State's defense arguably is better. Now, again, who they're going to have, who they're not going to have. I just don't know that Ole Miss is going to be able to score enough. Now, that could come back to bite me because we've seen bowl games before where, the offense has just gone nuts. But I think this defense has been good enough. I like what Anthony Poindexter is all about, even losing a guy like Manny Diaz, that they're going to hold Ole Miss to 17 points. Penn State's going to score 24. That's my score, 24-17. Tyler, you and I didn't want to change it because our bold predictions were similar, but they were different in a way as well. So, I look at what happened to Ohio State here in Atlanta last year with Noah Ruggles missing a very key field goal. And I think maybe there's, it's not going to be a game-winning field goal to me for Alex Felkins, but I think he's going to come out in an indoor stadium and tie at least the Peach Bowl record for a 53-yard field goal. So he's going to go deep from 53 or more. Felkins wraps up his Penn State career. He doesn't have any more eligibility, right? I mean, he's not going to get more. He's not going to get 2 more years after this. He's going to wrap it up with a 53-yard field goal, and Penn State's going to win by a touchdown.
Maybe he can join up with that Maryland quarterback and go searching for extra eligibility. I don't know. Daniel, what are you going with here?
Yeah, I think as I looked at this game, this was kind of a tough one to pin down. I think that when you get in the bowl season, there are a couple different factors that you can kind of key in on to use to pick these games. I think one of them is looking at opt-outs. Neither team has an overwhelming number. Another one is sometimes you get to this point of the season and there's just teams that just don't want to be here anymore. And I haven't got that impression from either team here. I think that you look at what Penn State has done from a culture perspective this season, keeping things intact, the guys that are playing in the bowl game. I said that earlier this week, talking to some of the Ole Miss defenders on Wednesday and kind of looking at where they are as a team and what they're doing. It reminds me a little bit of where Penn State was a year ago going into the Rose Bowl. So I think that these are two teams that want to be here, that want to win. And I think that's going to show in a pretty tightly contested game. I think I might have gone a little bit high on the points, but I think it's going to be a 28-27 game. Maybe 24-23 or 21-20 would have been a little bit more apt. But I think it's going to be a 1-point game. It's going to come down to the wire. And my bold prediction is that the difference in the game is going to come on a Daequan Hardy punt return for a touchdown. I think that he's one of those players that in the big games, he seems to show up. And I think that he's going to do that in a big way and really put the real exclamation point on his college career on this journey from what we just learned, silent Buffalo commit the week before his national signing day to making a big play in a New Year's Six game for Penn State.
I'm with you guys in terms of the investment on both sides of this matchup. I think it's a good thing that we get to cover a bowl where it feels like you have two competitors who are motivated to go out and win the game, and that extends from the staff to the players. So I do think it'll be a competitive matchup. I don't think someone's gonna fade off to the side here, and ultimately I'm predicting a one-possession game as well. I think the difference here will be the ability for quarterbacks to stay comfortable. I think Ole Miss is down an edge rusher in Cedric Johnson, and they don't have as much depth in that department as Penn State's able to do, and making up for the loss in the absence of Chop Robinson. And I also believe that based on the 12-game sample size, that Drew Aller is going to be very careful with the football. I think we all understand that, whereas Jackson Dart, only 5 interceptions on the season, but I like this defense's chances led by that plethora of pass rushers that they can throw out there, even without Chop Robinson. Keep an eye on Amin Vanover and Zariah Fisher, but the 9 Dennis Sutton, to me, is the guy who could really go out there and remind everybody that he is a 5-star talent, and he's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Big Ten in 2024. So I think ultimately they're going to jar Jackson Dart enough to get a timely turnover, and it's going to produce a short field for Penn State. I think they're going to come away with a 30-23 victory. Theo Johnson scores a touchdown to end his Penn State career in style. And bowl predictions staying in the special teams realm. I guess we're all in the same wavelength here. I also believe Felkins is going to finish his career on a high note. I got him going perfect on 3 field goal conversions and going 50-plus yards, a career long for him in a Penn State uniform. His career long thus far is 50, so I think he goes beyond that. I don't know if he breaks the Peach Bowl record. Maybe I'm not that bold as Mark, but I do think Felkins is going to show up in a big way. And since we're all picking special teams, I'll toss in one more bold prediction. I think Abdul Carter gets multiple sacks in this one and really sets the stage for him to be a major talked about defender across the country in 2024 as that season approaches. So there are predictions and our bold predictions. One else thing we'll throw out there, 60% off a discount right now at Lions 24/7 through the end of the year. You can enjoy all of our bowl coverage from here in Atlanta if you've missed any of that so far. But well beyond that, recruiting, transfer portal, full access to the 24/7 machine that is always giving you the updates. And, of course, right here locally, we all live in the State College community, and we are at every event, basketball, football. You will get it at lions247.com. So that's our quick spiel. Anything else to add before we say goodbye, fellas?
No, just looking forward to a great game. Should be fun, and glad Penn State got this matchup in this bowl. The hospitality here has been unbelievable. The people have been great. Atlanta, great city.
Yeah. Wrapping up our last preview podcast of the season, it goes pretty quick, but I think it's been a lot of fun. And like Mark said, I think this is a great matchup to close things out with. And everything down here in Atlanta so far has been fantastic.
Yeah, game 13 just ahead for us Saturday at noon. We'll be back with another podcast after that one goes final in the post game. And between now and then, be sure to catch our wide variety of Peach Bowl coverage at lions247.com. It's coming your way by the minute over there at the site. So we're going to step back, get back to work. Thanks for tuning into the podcast. On behalf of Mark and Daniel, I'm Tyler Donahue. We appreciate you tuning in to the Lions 24/7 podcast.